Hello lovely people, my name is Emma and today we're going to be looking at books about death, dying and the dead. So I've got mainly non-fiction to talk about with one fiction in there, and these are all books that look at sort of what we do with dead bodies and what it means to work in the death industry in some way or another. Death is something that's quite taboo to be talking about in Western society. We're very squeamish about how we handle our dead, and I thought this would be a really interesting topic to talk about because I have read quite a few books in this area and it's something that I find really interesting. The first book I wanted to talk about is Hayley Campbell's All the Living and the Dead. This is a collection of interviews, essays as such, of various people who work in different aspects of the death industry. So each chapter focuses on a slightly different aspect. You've got people like the person who sort of prepares bodies for being donated for medical use. You've got somebody who works in a crematorium, a grave digger, a bereavement midwife, an executioner, and Hayley Campbell goes to their world and basically has an interview. Kind of looks like what it is like for them to be working regularly within the death industry. I have a whole review of this book that I will link down below, but it is really poignant and really beautiful, and a fascinating look at what it is like to work on a day-to-day basis with death in some way, shape or form. I do wish the book had made more of a distinction between people who work with the dead and people who work with the dying, because I do think that that is very different. It comes with very different challenges about sort of emotional trauma and how you handle that. But it was a really interesting look at a completely different world, and it was really interesting to see sort of the amount of dark humour that happens in these things. I work in an industry where we deal with dead bodies quite a lot, but with animal dead bodies. I'm in veterinary medicine, so it was really interesting to see those comparisons of the dark humour that people use to kind of cope with these things. Obviously it is different when it is your own species rather than a different species, but it was still really, really interesting, and definitely something to make you think. I also think this one's a really good starting off point if you don't know where to go with reading books about death, because this gives you a lovely little snapshot into loads of different aspects, and then a lot of these books that I'm now going to talk about go into more detail of one particular area. If the idea of funeral director, crematorium, sort of preparations of the passing from life to death and the sort of ceremony around that appeals, you should definitely read The Smoke Gets in Your Eye and Other Lessons from the Crematorium by Caitilin Doughty. Caitilin Doughty is one of the sort of probably biggest name influencers within the death world. She has a YouTube channel, she does various things like Ask the Mortician, and this one in particular, she's got quite a few books. Another one of hers is going to feature on this list. This one is a look at what it was like for her to train to work in a crematorium and her early experiences within her career. Really, really interesting. Caitilin has a wonderful writing style. It has a lot of lightness and brevity to it, which is good given the subject matter, but she does definitely take her craft very seriously, and there's a lot of respect built into it as well. This is a book that I read quite a few years ago. It has been out for a while and it was incredibly popular on BookTube in the non-fiction circuit, so you may have heard about it before, but it is totally worth a read. It is phenomenal. And then we might as well stick with Caitilin Doughty because the other one of hers that I've read is From Here to Eternity, Travelling the World to Find the Good Death. This is her second book, and instead of focusing on her career, it looks at the different ways that societies throughout the world handle death, the dying and their dead. This one was fascinating, especially if you're more into like a history, cultural kind of person reading rather than the like memoir style, and you want to really learn about how different people approach death and different societies do. I think it's really interesting how we handle death in different ways. Western society is definitely the most squeamish, but it was really, really cool to learn about the different ways that people deal with these things and sort of how the grieving process works in different societies and what kind of emotional connections we attach to different aspects of a person, whether it be their body or what parts of their body. This is also a bit where Caitilin Doughty talks about what she thinks a good death means, because she has some quite strong opinions about things like embalming, and what she feels like is sort of an appropriate thing to do with the dead. So really, really interesting, and will definitely make you think about what you want done with your body after you pass. Now, one of the really cool things that was listed in All the Living and the Dead was basically how cadavers are dealt with when it comes to donating your body to science. And if you're really into that side of things, rather than the more like funeral rites side of the world of the dead, you definitely need to check out Stiff by Mary Roach. This is a look at all the different things that we do with dead bodies basically, and if you think that all you can do is donate a few organs or maybe let some med student chop up your body, you are completely wrong. There are so many different ways that you can donate your body to science and so many different things that we do with them, which is really, really, really cool. So I would definitely recommend this book. I think it's amazing. Mary Roach is a fantastic author. She is very much like a big pop science writer, and what she does is she picks topics that she doesn't know anything about, and then similar to the All the Living and the Dead, like she goes into that world and talks to different people. Each chapter is focused on a slightly different area, with the theme being cadavers and what do we do with them. So rather than Caitilin Doughty, who is obviously immersed and a member, like a professional member of that industry, Mary Roach and Hayley Campbell are more like outsiders coming in to learn something. So it's again, what kind of a style of non-fiction do you personally enjoy? Similar but on a slightly different slant and going a bit more actual like medical professional, Working Stiff is simply amazing. This is Judith Melinek, and this is 2 years, 262 bodies and the making of medical examiner, and this is basically somebody who does autopsies. Again, autopsies was mentioned in All the Living and the Dead. It is a really interesting aspect. They also talked in The Living and the Dead about people who come to kind of trauma sites and do identification of bodies when there are very little remains to be dealt with. And it reminded me of this book because later on in the book, Judith Melinek actually worked on the site of 9/11 and was involved in helping to identify the bodies of the people who died in the wreckage. So this is a really interesting book from a far more strictly medical standpoint. It is talking a lot less about the dead in sort of an emotional way or in any way connected to funerals or anything like that, but it's definitely fascinating and talks about the kind of emotional trauma that puts on the people who have to work in these industries. Really cool, very harrowing, and a little bit graphic is the wrong word because that implies a level of sort of gratuitous sort of vicariousness in it, but it is definitely not pulling any punches, not hiding behind any kind of smoke and mirrors or anything. It really is just laying out descriptions of what Judy has seen in her career, and in some cases that can get quite harrowing. Now, it would feel remiss to have a video about the dead and dying and to not include grief in some capacity about this. All the Living and the Dead had a really lovely quote in it where it said that people should basically be exposed to a dead body at some point quite early in their life because it helps you separate the shock of grief from the shock of seeing death when somebody passes who's actually close to you. And it reminded me of conversations that I had about grief and the process of grieving in The Way Through the Woods by Longlit Woon. Now, this is a lot more of a nature writing book than a lot of the other things on here, and the main focus of this book is actually mushroom foraging, just to let you know. But the way that Longlit Woon got into mushroom foraging was after the death of her husband quite young, and how she sort of dealt with that and how mushroom foraging helped reopen a world that for her had felt completely gone, and sort of the way that mushrooms function in our ecosystem and their connection with decay definitely was something that really helped her deal with the death of her husband. This book is stunning. You will learn so much about mushroom foraging, but honestly her writing style is just beautiful. It is an ode to nature writing, but also an ode to her husband in a way that is genuinely one of the most stunning things I've ever read. So 100% would recommend, especially if you are somebody who is like a little bit squeamish about some of the other things that we've been talking about. This could be an intro to death in a way that could be interesting for you. And then the final one I wanted to talk about is The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. Now, I know what you're thinking, what on earth is a contemporary romance doing on this list? Surely we should be focusing on the non-fiction and the slightly heavier stuff. But I bloody loved this book for it actually having such a wonderful, heartwarming conversation about, again, grief, passing, and what it's like to work with dead people. Basically, our main character in this, our female protagonist, her family were the local funeral directors in the small town that she's from. She can see ghosts, and that's something which she's had quite a difficult relationship with, the fact that she's basically, the living Addams family. She can literally see dead people, and her parents work exclusively with the dead. So she basically has to go back home because her father passes away quite suddenly, and it's about her seeing this particular ghost who's got a lot of unfinished business and sort of what happens there. But I really enjoyed that there were numerous conversations in this book about the dignity and honour that comes with dealing with dead people and being involved in that process of grief for people, and to be able to provide that support and the sort of honour that comes with that. So it was actually really stunning book. It's quite fun from like a contemporary romance side of things. The relationship is really cute, don't get me wrong, but I thought it'd be fun to include something on this list that wasn't just like, hey, here's a non-fiction that sounds really intense from the outset, and instead have like a fun contemporary romance that's just cute but also going to be dealing with funerals quite a lot. So those are all the books I wanted to talk about today in this video. I know it's a little bit different to some of the other stuff that I talk about. I say that, it's not. We've always been a bit creepy and morbid on this channel, and always a bit weird with our non-fiction. So do let me know in the comments down below, have you read any of these? I know Caitilin Doughty has a couple more books out that I haven't read yet. She's got like an Ask a Mortician and a few other things like that. Are there any other books that you would recommend in this area that you think I'd be really interested in? Because it is something that I do find fascinating, and I think a lot of people out there are similar to me in terms of wanting to be able to pull back the curtain and discuss sort of the great taboo, but the only thing that we all definitely are going to experience at some point. So have a wonderful reading week, and I'll chat to you soon. Bye.